Greetings, brothers and sisters. Uh, I'm going to get to a, bizarre movie, the Marvel movie, The Eternals, and where they basically admit to Satan worship. And not the way you think about it, like if you're a hardcore Christian, but the way that I believe, when people go away from God and turn in a egotistical, demonic direction. I'll explain all that in a bit. And just all of it. Like Marvel went like full self-destructive woke in this mess of a movie. I'm going to show you some clips. I have a whole thing to do with that. I want to do the narrative part of this video first, and then I'm going to get into the eternal thing. And I want to talk about here my wife's and I recovering from Omicron and some of the sort of like latent and weird side effects from all these COVID things, whatever they are, how it affects people's brains and getting stupider and things. The year of the dummy, and then I want to talk about Entourage. My wife and I have been watching Entourage for about 4 days. Like I heard of it, never thought I would like it, but a variety of people said I should watch it. My wife had seen it before a long time ago and forgot most of it. But it's an excellent show, and it talk about how it really, in a, not a truther way, but in a mainstream way, really admit what Hollywood's all about, right? And so I want to get into that also. But let's start with a health update. So I feel like I'm basically 100% recovered. My energy levels returned to where it was. I feel good. The Omicron was, like, my wife and I both experienced being sicker for longer with Omicron with some weird side effects, which I want to get into. And then also how I think these things are, in some ways genetically modified to dumb people down. So let's start off with that. My wife said she smelled cigarette smoke, and then she heard all these other people saying that they smelled something like something was burning. In fact, I think I smelled that a couple of times. And we had with COVID people losing their sense of smell and taste. And then there's been these other symptoms reported, which can only mean that it's messing with your brain or your mind, right? And after I had Omicron, I had trouble remembering people's names. Like I would be making a video of Bob Saget, and I would be doing a narrative, and I just said his name like 15 times, and I couldn't remember his name, right? Like just, I'm always bad with names. But the weird part was, like, let's say I was trying to remember somebody's name I hadn't seen in a while or something like that. And, if I thought about it enough, I would locate it somewhere in my system, my brain or whatever it is, right? Like I would, just think about it and find, like I'd be looking around in my brain. I mean, I didn't, consciously think about it that way. But I'd be looking around inside for the name because I knew it existed somewhere inside of me. If I couldn't do it, I would just Google, like if it's a politician or a athlete or a famous person. I mean, I would look it up or whatever it might be. But when I did that, I would just go blank. Like there'd be nothing there. Like my synapses weren't connecting. My wife and I were talking about this, and I think other people have experienced this, which is always a bummer when you realize you're not as smart as you used to be, or you're not functioning as well as you used to be. There are times when I've done the heartfulness meditation, I've gone to a gathering, or I had a really great sitting where I was so connected on a spiritual level to the, what's called the brighter world, the spiritual, sort of the heaven within. Like, when Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is within, the heartfulness system connects you to that, right? And there'd be times I would be so blissed out, I would just like stare at a wall and I'd be thoughtless and I just didn't care about anything, especially going to gatherings. And it was always a unique experience coming back from a gathering feeling that way, going to an ashram that was just saturated in this, divine love and spiritual energy, and then having to go back to working in treatment centers, like a prison-like environment, and it would like snap me out of this condition, and it kind of sucked. I could just feel it like disappearing, this wonderful feeling of bliss. It was kind of like that, but without the bliss, right? Where I just, I would stare blankly and I'd be looking for a name inside my mind, and I would just there's nothing there. And so I think that this is certainly affecting people's brains, is what I'm saying. Both of these, illnesses, and then I think a lot of the things that are being given also are, doing that as well. That this is in some ways meant to dumb people down and pacify them. And we'll see how that all plays out. So the second thing is I told people about my eyes. I was having weird stuff with my eyes, some like blurry vision and flashes of light. And, that continued. And, I went to the chiropractor. I was trying to get an eye exam and, it was months away. And I mean, the last eye doctor I went to, it kind of sucked because of COVID stuff. So I went to this guy and he recommended a clinic. I had looked into possibly getting my cataracts removed about 2 years ago. So I went to a place like that does, that kind of work. And then, they do deeper eye exams. And for the most part, my eyes are fine. The doctor, nice lady. She was, Chinese, but, American Chinese. Just a nice person, good energy. Answered a lot of questions I had, which was, it was a mostly positive experience. There was another doctor there, and, I got these tests done, and they didn't find anything wrong. My cataracts are still like, they go from a 1 to a 4, and mine are less than a 1. So I thought they might have gotten bad. I had this like ring that would be on the bottom of my eye. When I would close my eye, it would be a flash of light or dark if it was somewhere, that was very bright. And that had come and gone. It wasn't consistent. But I was having a lot of floaters and weird stuff going on. And I don't know if that had to do with maybe being pre-diabetic because I was having trouble. My heart was racing from eating anything sweet. I don't eat a lot of like sugar or candy or anything. And so, just when I was eating a meal, it seemed like I was having some pre-diabetic issues. And when I got COVID, I ended up being pre-diabetic. And then I, worked through that exercising and, taking various supplements and doing things to rebuild my health. And so that came back up after the Omicron. And I was like stuck inside. I didn't go outside for 11 or 12 days. And then it was just, I didn't have much energy to get exercise. And, whatever it was, it affected me that way. But that's gone, like all that stuff. And I've, developed a lot of more knowledge. I've taken so many different sort of vitamins and supplements for all these things, including my eyes. And so when I went in and the woman looked at my eyes, both of them, there's two, these two doctors, and they didn't find anything, right? There was a chance that I have macular degeneration. I have trouble. Macular degeneration. And what that is like, it leads to eventual blindness. I mean, it would be years away. And so I guess that if that's the worst thing, it sucks. But she didn't know if that was the case or not. She thought like it might be possibly early signs of that or just, wear and tear on my eyes or whatever. And she told me that there was these supplements you could take, vitamins, once it started to get like, midway bad, and then they have medication when it gets really bad. And I was like, what about taking the supplements now? She's like, I don't, you don't do it, now. And I'm like, well, why wouldn't we try to prevent it, right? So I'm researching that and looking into that just in case I have it. But the good news was when I went to get my eyes checked for a possible lens replacement for cataract surgery. And so the way it works is your cataracts go from 1 to 4. This is what I was told. And at 4, you go blind. It's too late to operate. But all the way up to 3, you can get your lens replaced inside your eye. And they have this, some sort of bio lens that they create that is like your glasses prescription. So you won't need, for me, I wouldn't need glasses anymore because I have glasses for long distance. And they have to get a real accurate measurement of your eye to get the bio lens right. And, there's all these things. But insurance only pays for it if it's at a stage 3. So, even though you might be able to get it, or it would be better to get it at stage 1 or 2, you might have problems at stage 2. They don't pay for it till you get to stage 3, and it's kind of expensive. And I was, looking into getting it done because I thought, well, what if there's a complete breakdown and that's not available, in terms of whatever, right? Like if this apocalypse thing is real, which, I kind of believe it is. Because my channel's Pockets of the Future and Apocalaughsnow. And so I was thinking, well, it might be good to get it done sooner than later. And then I wouldn't need glasses and things like that, which would be also kind of important. But the problem was my cornea was too thin because my eyes are dry. I had a lot of issues. I used to wear contacts, and apparently my eyes aren't getting watered enough, and so my corneas are dried out and have thinned out so much so they couldn't get an accurate measurement to give me the lens I would need, have a quality lens that would, they could be sure that it was the right size. And once they put a lens in there, you're kind of screwed. Like they can't, they could redo it, but, the measurements would always be off. And then I would be, I'd lose a significant amount of my sight. So that was a no-go, right? But when I, went to these doctors, they said, I mentioned that to the doctor, and she said, no, your corneas are fine. You could get that surgery if you wanted. The corneas are, about average. And I was like, well, that must be all the supplements I'm taking, because I, looked into that. And that's the one thing that sucks about allopathic medicine. It's not preventative, right? You have to, and I got as much information as I could for them, but this has happened time and time again. And then I have to look into other things, what are things that, that outside of the allopathic medicine model that I can do to enhance my eyesight, right? And so that's like a whole thing, right? It's a constant battle because I don't like doing it, and I don't like taking medicines, but I've gotten to the point where I realize, because there's all these old people in there and they all have, they can barely see, right? My dad was practically blind when he was 90. And so, this is something I have to consider. And now with these high def screens, electric light wears your eyes down, because it used to be that it was completely dark, and when it was dark and there was candlelight, which is soft on your eyes, and now with these very these high def screens, whether it's computers or TVs and electric light and things, your eyes aren't designed for that long a period of time of having light on them, right? They need to rest and relax, and people carry stress in their eyes, right? Get migraines and things. And so, my parents both had glasses and cataracts and all those things. And so my appointment was mostly good news, but I'm realistic about what's going to happen now. I'm on a slow path of my eyes getting worse. I don't need reading glasses yet, but, all those things are coming down the road. And that's why, you guys should be courteous of what I do here. Please don't send me stuff that doesn't pertain to me making a video, and long things that I have to read or whatever. If they're appreciative and you're being grateful, I just can't read them. And it's just, people have to realize that. Send me things that are, going to help me spend less time on the computer. Like if you find something that I'm likely to cover, that's great. But people send me long videos with no description of what it is, and I just don't watch them. I can't, this is partly due to my eyesight, partly to do with, I can't be on the computer longer than I should be, right? I know that this stuff is, well, I'll get into that more. I'll talk about the electromagnetic poisoning in a bit when I talk about the Eternals and just superheroes in general. But let's go to the Entourage show. And so, I'm really kind of enjoying the show because it brings me back to a time where, I used to have boys, right? When I'm not sure if it's based on Mark Wahlberg's life. He grew up in Boston, or Marky Mark. It's these guys are in Hollywood, but they were all childhood friends that grew up in, New York together. And I grew up in Connecticut, that area where, it's all kind of a similar type of people. And I played sports, and had my friends, who were athletes, and I had various groups of friends. And what happens in this period of your life, well, there's a couple things, because your friends will say shit to you, that other people won't. And I think women never really truly understand and experience this, that your friends will call you on your BS in ways that other people won't. Like just blatantly, with no filter. There's various demographics of people where they experience this. Sometimes women will do this in various demographics. But most people don't do it the way your 20-year-old male friends will do it. Like a couple of, your group of friends, your buddies or whatever it is, right? And the other piece to it is, like, there is a thing that happens where guys will start meeting their significant others, their longtime girlfriends or maybe eventual wives. And their friends will be like, you're whooped, right? Because it's a conflict between your social system, your buddies, your boys, and these people, your friends start leaving. They get a good job, they meet a girl, right, whatever it is, and they start leaving these this little social dynamic. And I was like one of the last ones, right? I mean, I didn't get married till I was in my 30s. Of course, I found heartfulness, but I didn't buy into the system, so I never really found my career and things like that when I was in my 20s, like all my friends did. But all that stuff gets old after a while, right? Going out and drinking, playing sports, and things like this, was wearing thin on me. I wanted something more when I was like 25 or so, and I didn't find it till I turned 29 when I found the heartfulness system, right? And that it changed my life, but I still remember those times. Like it's so foreign to me, and I don't have contact with my old friends. Only a couple of them. One of my old friends contacts me every year or so. He finds my email. I guess some of my buddies watch these videos occasionally. But anyways, Entourage does a good job of capturing those dynamics, and it's naturally funny. And so the difference between Entourage and your average sitcom, the sitcom model is that they come up with jokes, like concepts, and they have to weave the narrative of the show around getting those jokes in, to the narrative of the show, and they get into these situations, situational comedy, and the situation comes and dominates this, the sitcom for a half hour, and then disappears completely, right? And for the most part, there isn't a thread or a theme, where it progresses, and that's what an Entourage does. That there's this, continuation of these plot lines. Like occasionally you get with sitcoms, Sam and Diane, or Ross and Rachel in these shows, right? Or Jim and whatever, Pam, I guess, in The Office, right? Where there's a couple and they might get together and they sort of tease that out, but it's not really a consistent, it's not a real thread. Like it isn't, things are moving along. They just have these situations that come and go. So it's not something that sticks together like some sort of a mystery or, some sort of whatever it is, right? Any kind of a movie or miniseries or, hour-long shows that have a point to them, right? The plot is leading to something, and it's like a journey. But the two things that really stand out to me about Entourage, which was kind of interesting, number one, what makes it good is, they all know the BS that they that they live with, right? And so it's very accurate because most times actors are playing like a farmer or something, and they don't know anything about it. And the directors, maybe one or two of them grew up on a farm or like they're familiar with one thing or another. But not everybody in the cast and crew, most of them, the majority of them, don't have any experience in the movie that they're making, the characters that they're playing. And so they don't, know whether it's authentic or not. Whatever research they do, whatever they try to figure out, whatever experts they bring in, they don't authentically know it. But in Entourage, they're all a part of that Hollywood BS, right? So it's very easy for them to be authentic. It's really authentic because it's something they actually know about. Most other things they cover, they're just pretending. And one of the things that stands out is the handlers and the power dynamic. So we're like, in season 2, and Mandy Moore is like a guest star, and there's a meeting, and she has like 7 different handlers. And they're constantly telling this one guy who's part of the Entourage, who's the, his best friend's agent, to get his client under control and handle him, right? And so this is, an accurate description of the handling and the, the manipulation that happens in the Hollywood system and how they, get these celebrities to adhere to the social norms. But also what you really can see is who has the power, right? Whether they're hot or something, whether they're, they're peaking and what kind of positions they have. And the power dynamics in Hollywood, they do a great job of showing the power dynamics. You can see in the different interactions, what place they are. It's so hierarchical, right? The Hollywood system. And like everybody knows, and it's based in superficial, it could be the power of the way that you look, right? The power of what position or money you have, but it's very prevalent, in these dynamics and who they're willing to talk to and who is something they recognize as being on their level. It's almost like a caste system. And so in that way, they kind of expose a lot of the stuff in the truth community, not in a truther way, of course, but, it's interesting. And it's like a well done show. Everything on HBO is going to be better. It's going to be more realistic, and they're going to have better production values. So for the most part, it's been like an interesting experience. I'm glad people pointed it out because I never thought about watching it because, it was about Hollywood, right? Like I get enough of that here. Okay, speaking of Hollywood, now I want to get into the Eternals, which is such a woke movie, the worst woke movie of Marvel. Because Marvel went through this post-white guy superhero creation of their universe that ended with the Avengers, whatever that was, right? The fourth installment in the Avengers series. And then they were already starting to go woke, but then they went real woke. And you could really see it in the Eternals. And I just want to, preface this because, people look at me and, when I have to check a box for what, my ethnicity is or what my race is, I have to check white because, technically that's what I am, right? I'm part Irish, part Italian, part Albanian, and part Sicilian. And so, technically, right, I'm a white guy. But I'm not the kind of white guy, that people associate with white privilege. Like I don't, like I grew up in the suburbs, sure. My dad was a guidance counselor. But I was always sort of an outsider. And some of that was to do with me, and some of that was the way that people looked at me, right? Like I grew up in Connecticut in a time where when people were Italian and Irish, they were just being accepted because when, my grandparents came to America. My father's Albanian mother and Italian father, Sicilian father. The Italians were looked at as the way that people would look at immigrant populations like Mexicans maybe 15 years ago or 20 years ago, right? All those countries as well, these Latin countries that are below Mexico and Central America and South America. And so Italians and Irish, and I think Asians around that same time, Chinese, were looked at in ways where, immigrants were looked at, various immigrants are looked at now and for the past 20 years, right? They weren't accepted into the culture, they were looked at less than. And I grew up with a little bit of that. Like, I remember people looking at me and pointing out, that I looked Italian or just, like I didn't really care because I was in my own little, introverted world. But then when I was in high school, I noticed that, because I'm not seeing what other people looked at because I have sort of ethnic features and my last name was Romano, there was some slight prejudice against me, whatever. But more than that, I really just didn't fit in. I've always been a sort of a loner and an introvert and having dyslexia, and I, even as I was growing up as a kid, like I used to watch a lot of shows. There's a few African American shows on What's Happening and Good Times, and there was some like was considered like black movies like Shaft and things. But also when I watched like cowboy movies, I used to root for the Indians, right? I didn't root for local football teams, local sports teams, and things. Like I grew up in Connecticut, but my favorite teams were like the Vikings and the Cincinnati Bengals and the Cincinnati Reds and some of these other Oakland A's. I mean, I had these various types of Houston Rockets I liked for a while, just based in the teams and the players they had on them. And I didn't like the New York and Boston teams that were, 2 hours away from where I lived. And those were the teams I always had to watch because that was the local teams, the Jets and the Patriots and the Giants. They just like sucked. And, like I used to root against them or whatever it was, right? The Celtics were a great basketball team, the Larry Bird Celtics, but I didn't like the style of play. When I became a good basketball player, I was fast and I was a good athlete and I could run and dunk and things. And I didn't like, the style, the Boston Celtics, the style that basketball they play. I didn't like the Lakers either. I didn't like Magic Johnson. And so that was available. These were what everyone told you were supposed to like, right? And so I didn't identify with any of those things. And so people can look at me whatever they want, right? Judge me on some, like everybody else, some superficial criteria. But I always grew up as either feeling self-conscious where I felt like an outsider or where I would feel sort of like one with everybody And then it didn't matter what demographic I was with, what group of people I was with. I just felt connected, right? And that's, carried on through my life. Like with the heartfulness system, I look at when you feel like self-conscious, that's almost like, being in hell, where you feel very individualistic, very much an individual. And then when you feel sort of connected and you're in the flow of things, you feel like one with everybody, right? And everything. And so, that's what the heartfulness system helps people achieve. But now we live in a time of division. But in terms of my own experience, I saw that, what was used to be called the man, which was considered the white man, right? I didn't identify with that power dynamic or that person, right? And so, for most of my life, I would have been like, all right, good, take down the man, right? Get rid of this power dynamic that's now being attacked by the woke culture, but they're making it worse. Like, it isn't making it better. I'm not saying the first power dynamic is good. It isn't. It's not something that I like or felt a part of or approve of. The abusive type of, the oppressive policies that came from England and, the English culture and these things. And then, of course, the European culture with these other countries that went in and invaded and conquered countries and imposed their religion and imposed their beliefs and lifestyles on less militarily sophisticated groups of people that were conquered by those cultures, right? I understand all the abuse and, it's not a good thing. I don't look at that culture as a good thing, and I understand why people are against it because, for most of my life I was against it too, and I'm not for it now. But what they're replacing with it is so superficial and so wrong, and even worse in the sense that, at least there was some sense of God, even though God wasn't the God of, religion is very, non-authentic, right? It's not connecting to God. It's God used as a, religious power to control you, which I've documented here before. But now they're removing the idea of God altogether, and what they're replacing it with is even worse. And so that's the point of view I'm coming from. Like, I'm not trying to, say that, make America great again and this, Trump, the Trump supporters and Trump's view is the right one because I don't believe in it. Like, I don't think America was ever great, but now it's getting worse, right? It's getting worse because the woke culture is batshit crazy. It's even worse than the abuse is still there. The abuse and the oppression and the behaviors are still there. And it was demonstrated here, and I'll point it out and I'll show you as we go through this, horrific movie with so many plot holes and so much woke culture BS, like I can't even probably get to it all.
And something unusual's happening to Earth.
It is a side effect of the emergence. It is time for you to learn the true purpose of your mission.
So for those of you who did not see the movie, this is, all spoiler alert stuff. I'm not sure why anybody really has to sit through it that's not interested in the Marvel movies or doesn't like to watch crappily made movies saturated with the woke culture. So we're joining the movie in the middle, about the middle of the movie, about maybe a third through. And so in the beginning of the movie, you're introduced to the Eternals, which you're told are beings created by this celestial. These celestial beings are these giant beings that oversee the creation of the universe. And these Eternals have varying powers, which is very odd, and a lot of plot holes and weird stuff about that, which I'll get into later. But their primary job is to protect the human race here, in this case, from these monsters called deviants that are, like monsters. And they've killed all the monsters. They've killed all the deviants. But one has just showed up. And this character played Gemma, whatever her name is. She starred in that British TV show called Robots, which was a pretty good show for I guess the first couple of seasons. And she is now the leader of the Eternals, taking over for Selma Hayek, the former leader, both obviously women, which I'll talk about later. And she's about to be told that everything that she believes is a lie, that they're not there to protect the human race, but they're there to oversee the birth of another celestial that will cause the human race and the Earth to cease to exist, right?
Every billion years, new celestials must be born. The planet Earth was chosen to host the celestial Tiamat. In order to grow, Tiamat needs vast amounts of energy from intelligent life.
So obviously I need to edit this so it isn't, I don't get some sort of a copyright issue where I can't play the video. And so what's happening here, I'm filling in the blanks, is that he's saying that the Eternal's real purpose isn't to fight the deviants, but it's to see the emergence and birth of this Tiamat, this future celestial, this baby celestial, that has been planted, that he put a seed in the earth, and every billion years or so, these Tiamats are born to further the development of the universe. So and it has to be nurtured from the energy. It has to consume people, basically, to be born. And he goes on to say that the deviants prevented this by consuming human life, but the Eternals eventually eliminated them, and once that happened, once the deviants were eliminated and human beings could populate, then he's reached a stage here where there's enough humans for the Tiamat to be born.
Now, the human population of this planet has reached the required amount. It is time for the emergence to begin.
So you can see it's pretty plain here that the birth of this celestial is going to be the end of the Earth and all life on the planet.
Everyone on Earth will die. Everyone on Earth will die. Everyone on Earth will die.
So this is obviously the conflict, the central theme behind the plot, that these Eternals now know that everyone is going to die on planet Earth. And of course that can never happen. Pretty much every one of these superhero movies, the Earth is going to be destroyed, right? You got to save the world. You know how many times I've seen the world saved in watching movies, because the world's always a threat, certainly in all these superhero movies and these Marvel movies, and even, the DC movies. And so now this is a problem, because if they're to do what they're supposed to do, the Eternals, it means that everyone on planet Earth is going to die. And of course, they're not going to let that happen. The script writers, even though this Celestial looks like he's pretty powerful and, there should be no real opposition to this, these guys are going to have to save the Earth.
The end of one life, Cersei, is the beginning of another.
He's going to give this pretty standard Lion King-like speech here to this befuddled Eternal.
Our universe is a constant exchange of energy, an infinite cycle of creation and destruction.
This speech sounds very much like the Mahabharata as you see it, where Krishna is Arjuna, the primary hero of the Mahabharata, has to kill his mentors and beloved relatives and people that he, doesn't want to kill. And he has this moment where he basically breaks down in the beginning of the battle, and Krishna displays himself. Now, Arjuna is, there's two souls that incarnate from the god of preservation, Vishnu, right? There's a god of destruction, Shiva, and a god of creation, Brahma. And Vishnu incarnates with basically a twin soul. One is the soul of Vishnu. The other is the sort of humanized ego, which is called Nara, and the soul is called Narayana, right? And so in the Mahabharata, Narayana is Krishna and Nara is Arjuna. And Krishna displays his true form. And it's like just massive, like what this guy is showing. There's some graphics I'm cutting out, but it's basically like this scene. And Arjuna is so overwhelmed by it, it's like, all right, I'll fight, just don't show me that again, right? And so there's an element of life that nobody wants to deal with, right? People want to deal with simplicity, good and evil, right? Life is always needs to be preserved. But of course, death is a part of life. And there are things that are born out of death, right? There's transitionary phases. One thing dies. In fact, this whole culture, as you'll see as I talk about this in the movie, the woke culture is trying to eat the traditional culture, right? The Make America Great Again culture, which is Trump's culture, which I'm not. That's good. I'm not a Make America Great Again person. I don't believe in these Republican ideals and these things. But the woke culture is even worse. Like, I believe that the Make America Great Again culture is bad, and the woke culture is worse. But even if it wasn't, one is trying to eat the other, right? One is the woke culture is killing the Make America Great Again culture, right? And so even in this movie, which is based in the woke culture, there's this principle of one thing dying and something else being born from the thing that's dying, right? One door closing, another door opening.
Celestials use energy gathered from host planets to create suns, generating gravity, heat, and light for new galaxies to form.
Okay, so these guys are pretty important in this Marvel universe, right? These guys, these Celestials, creating suns is a very important job. As opposed, as we go through this, to all the people on Earth collectively, what are they doing that is equivalent to creating a sun? So this one Celestial being born, remember this later as we go through it, from this planet and sucking up all the energy that's on it to feed itself so it can use this energy, harness this energy to create suns and create galaxies, is far superior to all the collective work done by every human, plant, and animal on this planet, right? And so, this is a superior life form. Just, I mean, you have to kind of say it is, right?
Without us, our universe will fall into darkness. All life will die.
So we now know, if you're watching this movie, you now know that these Eternals are going to have to do something to stop this from happening, right? So if what he's saying here is true, and as the movie progresses, there's no evidence that it's not, that these celestial beings, each one of them, is responsible for starting whole new galaxies and planets and all these things and maintaining all of this stuff in terms of the creation of suns and maintaining life in the universe. I mean, they're the sun creators, right? And without the suns, there's no life. Without our sun, without any stars, there's no life, right? And so not allowing this celestial to be born or killing it to preserve the miserable human life that's here right now, right? Even if it was glorious human life, it's still not, as important as these celestial beings, right? So it should be a no-brainer for the Eternals to fulfill their duty and help this celestial be born. But of course, this is Earth, and it can never be allowed to be destroyed because we live on Earth, and this is a movie being made by humans, right? And so it's going to turn out that the Eternals are going to have to thwart the celestial from being born. So then this character, Cersei, played by Gemma Chan, I remembered her name, she is the star of this movie. She's the most important figure or character in this movie. And she asked if Ajax, or I don't know if it's the right name, which is the character played by Selma Hayek, who had this ability to heal people who they found dead. And she asked if she knew, and she said, and the Celestial said, yeah, she knew. And you have both done this over and over again, even though she has no memory of it, right? That they had both done this work time and time again, brought these Celestials into life at the cost of a planet and a planetary population of people that generated collective energy that this Celestial fed on.
It is here that I built and programmed the Eternals.
So this is where she finds out she's some sort of a robot and that she's had lots of lives and her memory's been erased. Like Pinocchio, she's not a real girl.
Everything dies except us. Because we were never alive.
So she realizes her and her eternal buddies were never alive. And this is an example of the audio. Like there's a lot of, it's hard to hear, it's hard to see because it's very dark. It's just a really bad production. It's a bad movie. And now I'm going to get into the woke stuff. There was one final part in his story here. So the first part is she asks why doesn't she remember any of this, because she's done this time and time again over billions of years. And he says because all of their memories are wiped after each of their adventures. There is a Angelina Jolie character is having memories and glitching out because of it. You know, there's often mind control in these Marvel movies. I think mind control has been a part of at least 5 of the movies. I think every one of the Avenger movies, and you know the WandaVision. So mind control is a big part of the Marvel universe. I think it's in pretty much all their movies in one way or another. And then it's again in here, their memories are being wiped, and then they're being reprogrammed and repurposed for another, billion-year excursion where they're bringing about one of these celestial beings. And then she says, well, why do you keep our memories after, each billion-year cycle? And he says, because he created the deviants, which were, there's predators on every planet. So he created the deviants to kill the predators so that the human life can evolve, intelligent life could evolve. But then the deviants developed free will, and they started to evolve themselves, and they started to eat humans. So then he created the Eternals without any free will. They didn't have any choice, and he had them kill the deviants, right? Because he made a mistake with the deviants, he had to create the Eternals. He makes a lot of mistakes for something that, well, let's get into this here. Just let's start off with the first phase of understanding the woke culture in the casting and the characters themselves. Before we get into the woke demographics that are, bizarrely in the casting of this movie, I first want to say this. I'm not against new things. I'm not against change. In fact, I don't like the culture I was born into. I'm not somebody who loved the American culture. I always had a problem with it, right? It just didn't suit me, and I went to a very liberal college for human service, right? That's how I finally got my college degree after 3 tries, and then I went to an even more liberal Santa Fe, New Mexico master's degree program. So I understand the liberal point of view. In my undergraduate program for human services, it featured Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States that documents the point of view of the oppressed people, because the victors always write history. You get the history from the people who won, and they are not necessarily the good guys or the heroes, right? And so, they're always going to write in a very subjective point of view. And so I enjoyed that book, and I enjoyed my education about, an alternative view of the mainstream system. And I don't believe in manifest destiny, this idea that the Christians, the Queen and her, ruling class, the royal family. I mean, the Queen, when she was sworn in, she carries an orb and a scepter that's supposed to represent that she's God's representative on earth, that there is some divine providence to the rulers of the royal family. And we know the royal family, I mean, most of us do, as this evil, oppressive and crazy and demonic family that gets into all kinds of bad things that we know about and things that we have heard, rumors and things like this. And the idea of manifest destiny is that these people believed it was their right to claim and kill Native Americans and take black people as slaves because they were doing God's work. They were, ordained by God to do whatever they wanted because God had given them the power to do so. And so I don't believe in the behaviors, the oppression, the slavery, the murdering of people, all the horrible things that were done by the British royal family and then, of course, now by America. And we're the evil empire. And we rule with our, demonic weaponry and our economic system, and we crush other countries and we destroy people's lives, and I don't believe in any of that, right? But there is something that was done that was based in divine will, and this was talked about by the third master of the heartfulness system when he said, that these aggressive cultures that came out of Europe connected the world. And there was bad behaviors, there was, they took liberties that they didn't have. They went against God's will, but they created a world culture by connecting everybody through their, conquering and colonization which was, an evil practice, but it served a divine purpose, right? So we now have a connective world, which is important for the next phase of spiritual evolution. Now, the way they went about it and the liberties they took and the evil actions they engaged in, and they're still, a part of our system now, of course, those things are demonic and go against the will of God, but partly what they did, part of what they created was something that needed to happen, and therefore they were doing God's work, divine work. But when we look at the entertainment industry and we look at the culture the way it's been, and there's been these white heroes, mostly white male heroes, that have been the protagonists in stories and, the movies and all these things, TV shows, usually centered around a white guy or a white woman in some cases, but mostly men. And now the woke culture is saying they have a problem with it. And I understand the issue. I understand why they have a problem with it, right? And even though I'm technically a Caucasian, a white guy, like I'm not, like no one would cast me as the hero or protagonist. If I went to Hollywood and they cast me in a movie, I wouldn't be the hero or the protagonist, right? I don't fit in. I don't, sort of identify with the culture. And, myself, I like diversity. I've watched movies, all kinds of different foreign movies. I'm interested in other cultures and just, differences among people. And I watched all kinds of different, types of TV shows and movies when I was a kid. And so much of what's on TV and in the movies is just for stupid people, right? Like I can't stand those Fast and Furious movies and just, action movies that have no point and, no character development, right? And so none of this stuff offends me that they're trying to replace the white character if it was done in a way that was organic and it fit with the movie and it was done with a sense of bringing us back to divinity, right? Because right now our culture is going away from God. And as I'm going to demonstrate now with this, these different scenes in the Eternals, the woke culture wants to take people further away from God, right? Not that the religion of our country and, all these things were good. They weren't, right? There's flaws in them, and I'll talk about that as we go through it. And so our religion was already dividing us from God, as was our materialistic civilization. But now the God of science and the God of the woke culture wants to take people further away from God. So it's just going to get worse. They're not replacing something bad with something good. They're replacing something bad with something worse. So keeping this in mind, this is how they cast the characters and frame the narrative of the externals, of these Eternals. I keep on wanting to call them the externals, and they're very superficial, so it should have been called the externals. But this is how they decide to cast this movie. So this is Salma Hayek, who's always kind of difficult to understand, and I think she was miscast as sort of the leader. Obviously, they want to push women in leadership positions in the woke culture. She has the power to heal people. And I've already talked about Gemma Chan here, who is she can transform things from one thing to another, right? She has the ability to transform matter. We know that Salma Hayek is Hispanic, Gemma Chan is English, and I believe Chinese. This dude is Scottish, and he is his character is named Icarus from the Greek mythology. All these characters represent various myths because they've been around for 7,000 years protecting humans. So this guy's Scottish. He's one of the two white guys, and both of them are kind of dickish. This other guy is Irish, so he's Scottish. He's Irish. Both are kind of hard to understand, right, in terms of their accents. I mean, all the dialect is not that easily understood. And this guy ends up turning out to be the villain, right? He goes with his original programming, his original purpose that he was given by the Celestials. Somehow he's cast as a villain, and I'll go through that because the Celestials kind of represent the divine will. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. And so this guy's superpower is he can shoot lasers out of his eyes and fly, and he's very much like Superman. In fact, this dude's son calls him Superman because there's like a viral video going around about this guy, right? And this guy's powers, he can control people's minds and make them do whatever he wants. This dude is an African-American gay man who marries another man and then adopts a kid, which we'll get into later. And these two guys are at war. The white guy here and the African-American gay man are at war. They hate each other. They have conflict, right? Somehow Angelina Jolie isn't pictured here, but she has some, weird. She has some sword thing. She doesn't sound like an American, even though she's got that weird elitist accent. The other American is this little girl who never grows up, right? For some reason, these Celestials decided to make the United Nations and get as many different demographics and different types of people as they could, which seems odd since they all come from a billion years ago, long before the Earth was ever created, and yet they all have some sort of earthly connection with their ethnicity, their accent, and their orientation to life. And this girl is compared to Tinkerbell because she never grows up, and she's called Sprite. I forget this dude's name. He's Indian. He ends up. I've seen this guy in a couple movies. One was about, it's a comedy. It was okay. It was about he was an Uber driver, right? It was called like Stuber or something. He's an American actor, and I'm not sure what this girl's ethnicity is, but she is deaf. So for whatever reason, the Celestials decided to make a deaf person. She has, she's really fast. She can create illusions, this girl. And this dude has these powerful fists. And I believe he's Chinese as well, but he's, Asian of some sort. I'm not sure of what origin. And like I said, Angelina Jolie, I don't even know what country she's supposed to come from. She almost has an English accent, and she has that air about her, and, it's kind of annoying. But the United Nations aspect of it makes no sense, like I said. These Celestials created, these flawed human beings, and they didn't need to. Like, they have this spaceship which they could use to just wipe out the deviants, right? They have technology, and they're like kind of almost evenly matched with the deviants. Like, they win, but, they could be made so powerful they could wipe out the deviants with, whatever powers they have, right? They don't need these individual powers. And, they could just be plain out robots. They don't have to have personalities and these things. I mean, they could just be some technological weapons that just sit there and, wait for a deviant and then, come to life and destroy them. It's not like the whole movie shouldn't really even exist. The technology that these Celestials possessed is just no match for the deviants. This guy's superpower is he has the ability to create technology. He's also supposed to help the human beings advance technologically by giving them, technological developments, and that ends up backfiring, and, there's things to do with that. And so, why would the Celestials make a deaf character? Only because they want to have a handy, capable person in the cast, right? So it's completely contrived and forced and doesn't make any sense. Again, these beings, these robots are supposed to be billions of years old, and yet they give them all these different types of personality configurations. They're very, thin-skinned, and they're very immature for being elder beings. And, of course, then they are told that everything that they've learned is a lie, and we'll get into that in just a moment. And so that, sort of sets the stage for this woke culture, this bizarre woke culture, and the casting and the configuration of these different types of personality types. And I should say one other thing before we get into the clips. And so if you look at this guy is put front and center. And previously the Marvel Universe was built on white guys. Two of them, Thor and Captain America, were blonde, blue-haired white guys, right? And then, we had Tony Stark, and then, of course, Peter Parker as Spider-Man, these various characters that have been white men who have been the protagonists of the original Marvel Universe, right? And so in the, last Avengers Endgame or whatever it was called, there was a couple movies before that, Black Panther and Captain Marvel, and there was the woke stuff going on and the Me Too stuff going on. And so they started to change over the Marvel Universe. But the problem was that they'd already built it on this idea of the white male protagonist, right? And this guy ends up being the villain, like I said, but the way that they've pictured him here he's at the centerpiece, right? He's the guy who looks like he's the, the Superman-like character, like I said. He's the guy who's in the center here, but he is, definitely not the protagonist, and he has been demonized. And, there's all these ways that he represents the old culture and the old Marvel universe, which they were perfectly happy to, build on these comic books that were all based in this type of culture, right? Based in white American culture for the most part, right? These were Marvel comic books targeted mostly young white men who read them. And so this is them doing a bait and switch where they're putting this guy out front only to later find out that he is the villain and he is, the problem, right? More than the villain, he's the problem.
Bring all the other planets we were sent to, and everyone dying during the emergence.
I thought we were heroes. Turns out we are the bad guys.
Okay, so so this is the first contact that Cersei comes back after she's communicated. She's intercommuned with this Celestial, and she tells those guys their life has been a lie, and she has, most of them are there. They don't have all of them. But she's going to tell them that, everything that they believed is a lie, and now that they have the freedom of choice to either go along with the plan and what they were designed for, this is a representation of the divine plan and the soul's plan, or deviate from it and save the world. And, you know what they're going to do, because this is a human movie on planet Earth, right? But they are saying that they're the bad guys. This is what this guy says here.
We're not the bad guys, okay? We've helped the Celestials expand life across the universe. That's not what bad guys do. That's what good guys do.
And so, based in the narrative, these Celestials are creating suns and galaxies and expanding life throughout the universe and then overseeing the universe. And without them, without allowing this being to be born, there will be no life in the universe. There'll be no suns. There'll be no light or heat, right? There's not a lot of light in this movie. Like I said, the movie's like just dark the whole time. It's hard to understand. It's hard to hear. It's like that Tenet movie where they played the music so loud and the characters mumble and you can't understand what they're saying. And you're like, what's going on here? Like, this is the worst choices as a director. But, it's a no-brainer here. These beings are superior to human life. They're superior to the Eternals. They're superior to the Deviants, right? They have a greater purpose. They have more responsibility. They're God-like, right? This is a representation of God. And I'll get into that more in a bit, in terms of higher and lower and what people with, what human beings fail to realize, right? About, the hierarchy of life, right? The food chain, in a sense, the divine food chain. And so, and the woke culture has a lot of problems with hierarchies, which I really haven't talked about. But it's a no-brainer, right? Yeah, we got to do what we're meant to do, because the people on this planet and the planet itself isn't as important as this celestial being. And now they're talking about being bad guys and, right, usurping the position of their creator, which is a representation of God.
Every time innocent lives have been sacrificed for the greater good, it turns out to be a mistake.
This is a complete fallacy on a couple of levels, right? First of all, they're not being sacrificed. These lives aren't being sacrificed. There's a food chain. And even if you're a vegan, you're killing life. You're consuming living matter. As human beings, we need to consume living matter. There's actually a spiritual state where people don't have to eat, where you don't have to consume food. But that's not available to most or all of us right now, in the Kali Yuga. And so all of us have to consume food, and we have to take life to keep on going, right? And eventually, when we die, we'll be consumed by microscopic organisms or predators or whatever it is, or by fire, whatever it might be, right? Everything dies and is consumed for something else. And so in the hierarchy of life, you see this with human beings, we are able to, respectfully, we're not respectful, we are able, because we are higher developed souls, to not only eat other animals, but to place, various things, use resources, trees, again, respectfully, not clear-cutting forests, not killing just to kill, but respectfully, and given, asking God for permission and having a sense of we're all connected, all life and all beings are connected, and eventually we're going to die. And as being, not the highest level of spiritually developed beings, we might have to, in a sense, sacrifice ourselves for the greater good. And that doesn't necessarily mean, death, but it might be sacrificing our desires or our agenda for, and I'm going to talk about this more in depth later on in this narrative. And so, this idea that these celestials are sacrificing life, know that the life on planet Earth is being given and is being created to serve a purpose, just like everything serves a purpose. And for this, in this case, they're being created so they can help develop this celestial being, right? And so if you kill this celestial being and all these other, billions of galaxies and planets don't evolve and don't come into being, and the suns go out and there's no life because you chose Earth, because you're selfish, because Earthlings are selfish. But the other thing about this, the woke culture claims to be pro-life in a way, right? In this movie and, pro-ego and things. But they are, in terms of abortion, in terms of procreation, in terms of demonizing motherhood, looking down on mothers and saying, mothers are somehow less than, right? That women need to be something more than a mother and not just a mom. I've covered this before. And so they have very contradictory beliefs, right? They don't want to serve or sacrifice the greater good, and yet they want to have their own selfish lives, often without kids, right? And so there's a hypocrisy here, right? Most people don't know how much their footprint is, how much damage they're doing to the environment, and how much is consumed for their lifestyle. There's lots of people who want to be, woke and progressive, but they don't want to give up their, whatever it is, their privileges. They don't want to give up their American life, their, things that they complain about America, but they aren't giving anything up, right? They're not sacrificing anything themselves. They're very selfish, and they're, they want to live, right? Everyone wants to live because we've been given a survival instinct, and I'll come back to that in just a moment.
We have to stop the emergence.
Cersei, we have no right to stop the birth of a celestial.
There has to be a way Tiamat can emerge without destroying the Earth.
So a couple of days ago, she was put in a leadership position because she was chosen by the, dead leader, Salman Hayek, to be the leader. And she got this little orb that went inside of her, the orb, back to the orb with the queen. And she can now communicate with the celestial. And then just hours earlier, she communicated with the celestial, and she's now given information that she wasn't given before, which, unfortunately, in the heartfulness system, it's often talked about obscurantism, which is where, people who run the country or divine beings that come down here are only able to give limited amount of information. Sometimes it's because people are deceiving you, the leaders are deceiving you. Sometimes it's because as people we're not evolved enough. But anyway, she just found out about this system. She just found out that the Celestial's going to be born on Earth. And then within hours, she's like, oh, we can do better. We can change this divine system, right? She doesn't know anything about it hours ago. Now she knows about it, and she already knows more.
We just have to delay it until we figure out how.
She would delay it by reducing the human population, which isn't an option. So they also come up with a plan to put the Celestial asleep using the Irish kid's mind control powers, but that falls through. And so, spoiler alert, they end up killing the Celestial, which is coming, right? But they're, trying to come up with this plan and deviating from their purpose, right?
You're kind, my friend. You will be responsible for your own extinction one day, don't you think?
And so they go to get the Irish guy. The Indian guy who was making Bollywood movies brings a valet, right, this other guy that this Irish guy's talking to. So he's talking to a human being and says, your kind will be responsible for your own extinction one day. even though he had hoped, like he had thought he could use his mind and mind control everyone around the world and keep them from their human tendencies, but then he later realizes that that isn't good because humans have to express what they are, right? And so he's going to try to save the humans, even though he just said here that he knows that humans are on a self-destructive path, right?
I've just been told I've been sent on a suicide mission for the past 7,000 years, and that my entire existence is a lie. So excuse me for not giving a shit about your plan right now.
So this guy doesn't care, and he doesn't believe the humans will be successful, thinks they're going to extinct themselves, but somehow he decides to go against the will of his creator and, kill this celestial being that is responsible for future billions of lives, even though life is so precious to them. Human life, Earth life, right? But other life in other galaxies, not so much.
I did this. If my technology hadn't helped them advance.
So this guy who's in charge of technological advancement for the human race feels responsible for Hiroshima because he gave them expedited technology and it led to this, right?
Chewie was right. Our mission was a mistake. These people, they're not worth saving.
So he says this here, right, that Drewy, which is the Irish kid, is right, because they had a conversation earlier in the movie, that these people aren't worth saving, that if they're left to their own free choices, that they'll end up destroying themselves. But both of these guys are going to be instrumental in the killing of the Celestial, right, to save the planet and the human race. And this guy changes his tune when he finds love.
Close.
Daddy, watch this.
Okay,
Watch
let me
this.
see. Let me see it.
Dad, I'm only a starter.
Hi.
Hello.
So he gets married and has a kid, and all of a sudden he's wanting to destroy the Celestial, like he changed his tune now because his personal circumstances have changed.
To increase the population at all costs. Just farming humans as food for the Celestials, right?
And humans are farming livestock and plant life for their survival, right? So, like people, when they become part of the food chain, hey, this isn't fair. When a superior being is going to absorb them the way they've been absorbing lesser life forms, right? But this is, the natural order of things with organic life.
That's bleak. Well, so is telling your husband and your child that they could be dead within a few days.
Thought you'd given up on humans.
I got lucky, okay? They've given me faith again.
So he's choosing for himself in the short term. Now, for some really, ridiculous reason that doesn't make sense at all, the Celestials gave these Eternals the capacity for relationships, right? Because it's stupid. Because inevitably, if they're in Earth for 7,000 years, they're going to form attachments. So this woman, Siri, and Icarus have been together, but now she's with a human man, and, these various relationships are happening. And because of this guy's relationship and his family, he's willing to sacrifice billions of years of work in future galaxies for his, personal attachments. It's ridiculous that the Celestials would, it's just... so many plot holes in this movie.
And I see the good in humanity in them every single day.
So Icarus has a flashback.
We have to tell them the truth.
What? Why?
Because together we might be able to stop the emergence.
So Selma Hayek has, her character has been intercommuning with the Celestial and has known all along what their true mission has been, but she hasn't told the rest of these guys, but she tells him, this guy, Icarus, and he's kind of tortured by it, but he understands that it is necessary, right? And then she tells him that she's, because of Earth is so special, that she has a change of heart.
5 years ago, Thanos erased half of the population of the universe.
Which is a huge plot hole. She said that set the celestial, the birth of the celestial back. But, these celestials, I mean, they're supposed to be these powerful beings, certainly more powerful than Thanos. And when he wiped out half the population, again, these two universes can't, they're trying to bring in this woke universe and they're trying to bring in this other narrative. But because of things that have happened in the other, the other movies in the Marvel universe, they don't jive, right? Because this narrative doesn't go with the other one. Because the Celestials certainly would have had an invested interest. I mean, if they've created these guys to make sure that the deviants don't reduce the population, and some dude's going around the universe collecting Infinity Stones so he can reduce the population, you think the Celestials might do something about it, right? But they don't.
I traveled the world living among them. I have seen them fight and lie and kill, but I have also seen them laugh and love. I've seen them create and dream.
Have you seen them create a sun in a galaxy and create billions of life forms? Well, then that's what's at stake here. This is a no-brainer. Like, if one thing has to be preserved, the higher life, the more important life has to be preserved. One of the teachings, great teachings of Master Chargy of the Heartfulness System, he said, the lowest level of the higher is always higher than the highest level of the lower. And that's something for everyone to understand. The most evolved, whatever, seagull or dog or cow or chimpanzee isn't still above the lowest level of human life, right? And so this is what everyone has to consider. And the higher always has to be preserved, especially when the higher is responsible in doing God's work for, so much, right?
This planet and these people have changed me.
Of course they have, right? Those other planets must be filled with, real assholes then. Because you walked on a, Hiroshima, right? And all the rest of it, right?
I can't let you betray Arisham. I've been loyal to you, Ajak. Kept your secret for centuries. Lied to everyone I cared about. But never have I doubted my purpose to serve the Celestials.
So he, recognizes the bigger picture here and that the Earth isn't worth, all the catastrophe that will happen if the Celestial isn't born. So he ends up killing Selma Hayek's character.
No.
So then this is the most important part coming up and the reason I made this video.
Boss, what are you doing?
I've let this go on long enough.
So the other Eternals are on the verge of building something that dude who, does the technology stuff is building something so they can merge their minds together and overtake the Celestial. And this guy comes out and finally admits that he'd killed the previous leader and that he'd kill all of them to prevent them from, stopping what's supposed to happen here.
He lied to us. He already knew about the emergence.
To keep on lying to you? If we gave humanity the choice, how many of them would be willing to die so that billions more could be born?
Really, basically no one. How many people would give up their lives now for the betterment of the human race? Let's say everyone knew or was convinced that we're overpopulated, and if you gave up not even just your life, your lifestyle. How many people are willing to give up electricity, say only have electricity for 12 hours a day, or not drive your car as much, or not, eat certain kind of foods, or whatever it might be, just to preserve the resources for future generations? Almost nobody, right? Almost nobody would give up just a little bit of their lifestyle, because right now we're a very selfish race, all of us, across the board, right? Everyone who's judgmental and sucky and all these people want to cancel culture, we're all in the same boat. The majority of us wouldn't sacrifice anything for future generations, and even future generations of ourselves when we come back in another form, another incarnation. And so that's where human beings are. And so you can't make a case for saving them when there's something much more important at stake here, right? And this movie's like a joke on so many levels, aside from these plot holes. But this is where they basically tell you, I'm talking about the controllers, what they really think.
We're not giving them a choice. Is this why you're willing to kill?
You're deciding for them, right? Which, which they do throughout. They complain about the Celestials wiping out their memories, but they, the Irish dude was wiping out memories of Aboriginal people and different types of people and their presence there, and he was controlling their minds. I mean, it's just, like the hypocrisy here. But this is the big exchange right here.
You are so pathetic!
I'm an eternal, Fastos. I exist for Arisham, as do you.
And so what this is really about is the ego and the soul. I'm going to come back to this because it's really important. It's a great opportunity to talk about something and them divulging what, the controllers, the people who run the system in Hollywood, what they're trying to do on a planetary basis.
I wouldn't change a single thing about who I am, born or made, but I do not exist for Arishem. I exist for my family.
And so the way they shape this narrative that the gay black dude and the cisgender white male, right, are in this conflict. And so the Celestials represent God, your divine creator. And the white dude wants to serve his purpose and serve his creator and stay on his soul's path. And the other Eternals, except for two of them, all want to deviate from their soul's path and embrace the path of their ego. And what this dude just expressed, this gay dude just expressed, was that, the expression of the ego wanting to exist for itself, right? And that's what these, the Hollywood has always pushed, but there's something different now because we're coming to a transitionary period. And I've talked about this in terms of the heartfulness meditation, right? And I don't know how much, I haven't known how much the controllers know about what's going on. It's an end of a yuga. There's going to be massive depopulation, and they're going to lose control, and our system is going to collapse, right? A system that they control, and then there's going to be a new paradigm and a new power structure. And what they're trying to push here is to usurp the will of God, like in my book, The Choice. They're trying to stop something they know is going to happen from happening. And, life is, we all have something in us for life preservation, survival instincts. And our ego wants to survive. Our ego wants to proliferate and continue to grow and dominate our soul and make its own choices, make its wrong choices. Because, there's that element within every life form, the will to survive, right? The will to, keep on going, keep on living. And it needs to be there. It needs to be there. Otherwise, we would just all die, right? We need to have something that keeps us eating and reproducing and all the things that go with organic life. But our ego at some point, and this is something that very few people unfortunately experience, it's a kind of a drag. At some point, your ego realizes there's a greater purpose. There's, you get an inside view of something divine in your soul's path, and something's awoken in you. This is what happens when you do the heartfulness meditation. And now you realize there's a bigger purpose to your life. There's a service element to it, and you have to sacrifice some of the things your ego wants to do. And that's really in terms of, like, when people think about human sacrifice or sacrificing for God, it's really about that. It's not, the sacrifice of your life. It's the sacrifice of your freedom of choice to do wrong. And it's something that all of us who end up stumbling on a spiritual path end up fighting with all the time. It's an inner struggle we have of doing what God wants us to do, doing what our soul wants us to do, or doing what, our ego is forcing us to do, our ego is demanding to do, right? And so there's this battle. It's a difficult battle, and that's why very few people become saints. Very few people are successful on the spiritual path. But it's the true battle. And this is what they're talking about here, right? They're talking about trying to usurp the, God's plan that's bringing their power and control system to an end. And they're trying to get as many people on board as possible, creating these big egos and going against the divine order, going against what's supposed to happen here. And this movie is one of their admissions, right? Because they already talked about depopulation and eugenics with Thanos, right? That there's going to be depopulation. And that's going to affect the system. It's going to affect everything. And they're both working to create that so they can survive the people who control the system and also undermine the divine order of things. And that's what this exchange is really about, right? They are admitting to this in, a fictional movie where people discover their soul's path. They discover a deeper level of truth. And it's difficult. Like, it's difficult because your soul, when you learn that you have an eternal soul, you still have a body, you still have, a fear of death, you still have a desire to live and, do whatever you like doing on, in terms of your human form. And there's a battle between serving God and serving your soul and serving the spiritual aspect and the greater good and doing what you want to do, right? You're giving up your freedom to choose wrong, like your freedom to choose the wrong thing. But these guys are embracing, the so-called heroes of this movie, are embracing the devil's path, because this is the real devil's path. When people think about the devil, whatever was written for the Bible was written for very primitive people 2,000 years ago in a certain, in Israel and that part of the, Rome, those parts of the world, right? A lot of the religious teachings was just what people were able to understand. But there's more sophisticated understanding of God and demonic energy, and it's really about your ego. It isn't, people become demonic because their egos end up casting off God's will. They end up going and doing their own thing, and, they make this choice to usurp the position of God, and that's what they're talking about here. There's a divine plan, there's a divine purpose. They have a divine purpose, but they're choosing for their own selfish reasons to thwart the divine purpose here.
You do not turn against your family. Gilgamesh died because of you.
He won't succeed against me. And I will kill every one of you if I have to.
Wait.
So the blonde girl that never grows up goes with the white guy, right? Goes with the white villain. There's a lot of symbolism here. She's, in perpetual adolescence, and, she can't think of the bigger picture, all these things, right? But this is very, this whole part of the movie gets really, really woke, really, really quick.
What if we end up accidentally killing Tiamat? We could be responsible for billions of lives not being created across the universe. Boss, am I right?
And so I'm going out of order here. For some reason, I taped this in the wrong, it is what it is. But this actually happened before that last scene. And so the Bollywood guy and Tinkerbell are on Icarus's side, and he makes the point that, billion of lives can be lost, which is the only point, right? And future creation and the natural order of things that these guys just found out about 10 minutes ago, and they're already trying to overturn it for their own personal and, deluded reasons.
Say something, Icarus. Forget who Ajax chose. You're the strongest. You should be making this decision.
See, he's the most powerful. He's a Superman character. He's the guy with the white privilege, the former protagonist, the guy who would have been the hero in the old Marvel universe, right, before woke culture and Me Too took over Hollywood, right, all this stuff that's happening. And this girl who's stuck in perpetual adolescence is trying to, keep the old guard together as this new diverse group of people is usurping and taking over the position of power of the white dude, right? This is, classic woke culture stuff.
Where's Cersei?
You always did underestimate her.
So, this is, again, classic woke culture stuff. He's underestimated his woman, right? The woman's been under his thumb, his power, his mansplaining, all these things, right? The white guy, and he's being told that his woman has exceeded him, has gone beyond him She's developed her own power enough to take down a celestial and ruin the natural order and go against God's will, right?
Oh no, not so fast. Boss.
So this is a very telling fight scene.
I don't know about you, but this is really satisfying, right?
Let me go, Fastos! I can't let her do this!
I don't think so. I've been wanting to clip your wings for a long time. Icarus!
So they've created this conflict between this gay black dude and the white heterosexual dude, right? And the gay black dude tells him, I wanted to clip your wings for a long time, Icarus. I wanted to take away your power. I wanted to restrain you. I wanted to, usurp your position. And so there's a lot of symbolism here, right? There is a lot of, like the Celestials representing God and this Icarus character's representing Jesus, right? And the thing about it is I talk about behavior all the time. If you're against oppression, great, be against oppression. You're against abuse, be against abuse, but in all forms. And what we're seeing is a switch in the power dynamics. That's all this is. And the people who control the power still control the power, but they are helpless against the divine forces. They're trying to leverage their hold on this earth. And there's what's called the divine hierarchy in the heartfulness system. These divine beings that are more of a representation of these celestial beings. And they're etheric. They're not in, physical form. But they, keep things going in a divine direction. And they have interventions, and there's an intervention happening right now on planet Earth. And the powers that be are trying to blackmail or use the earth as we're going to destroy this thing if you try to take it away from us kind of mentality, which is evident in this scene. And so all this scene shows you is that one group is trying to take the power away from another group, right? They're trying to usurp the power of this guy and the Celestials and make decisions. Like they're making high-level decisions that they didn't even know existed like a week ago, right? And this is the problem with the woke culture. They're not changing the behavior. They're not against abuse. They're just against the people who get to abuse, right? They want to be in the power to abuse. They want to be the dominant groups now, the dominant demographics. You're not changing any sort of, the core way that people behave. You're not connecting to God and rising to a higher level, like I talk about with the heartfulness system, where you bow to your soul, you bow to the divinity that's within you, and you follow a divine path, right? This is the path of the ego. The woke culture is so egotistical, it's even worse than the previous culture. As much as they want to claim the previous culture, the Make America Great Again culture, is abusive, the woke culture is even more abusive, even more oppressive. They want to tell you how to think and feel. They want to dominate your every part of your existence, take away every aspect of your freedom to choose to do the wrong thing or the right thing. They want to disconnect you from God and the family and put their worldview onto you, right? You can see it. It's very clearly, and it's very well illustrated in this movie what their agenda is. So Cersei ends up killing the Celestial, transforming him into rock, right? And then, killing all these future... I mean, we all know what's going to happen here. And the white dude, realizing that he's been defeated, Icarus, flies into the sun for whatever reason.
You have chosen to sacrifice a celestial for the people of this planet. I will spare them, but your memories will show if they are worthy to live. And I will return for judgment.
And that's just stupid. That's the worst ending ever. Like, he's got a plan. He had a divine plan. I mean, he's the most incompetent divine being or God or celestial being ever, because he already screwed up with the so-called deviants who had their own freedom of choice and went against his will, the programming and the system. And then he sent these Eternals down, right, who are deeply flawed, very emotionally immature. Well, he could have just created some sort of robotic. I mean, they were robots, right? And they came down, and he already knew that he had lost one group to freedom of choice, and then he loses another group to freedom of choice. Doesn't oversee the thing to make sure this celestial being that's really important hatches, right? Is born. It's just really stupid. And these Eternals who, a few of them are in relationships. Cersei's in a relationship. That other dude has the husband and the kid, right? A few of them have had human relationships and been won over by the humans. But these marital relationships are only going to last a short period of time. We already know this from the Highlander movies, right? That when you're eternal and you live longer than the humans, then you're going to be lonely your whole life, because everyone who you love is just continuously going to die, and it's going to be a loss of whatever, right? Just, it's short-term thinking. But like I said, what this is really about is the cultures are trying to usurp the will of God, the divine order of things, because this age is ending, right? This is the end of the Kali Yuga. It's the end of the ego, the time of egoism and brute level existence, and it's going to be a rebirth of higher developed souls of vibrating on a higher level, reaching up to a higher level of spirituality and divinizing this depraved planet. And they're fighting against it tooth and nail, and all these movies are about big egos, and the woke culture is an egotistical culture, and they're clinging on for dear life, trying to prevent this thing from happening, but they can't, right? Like they can in this movie, but they can't in real life. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paramano, definitely important for the Apocalaughs and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.